Heavenly Father, I pray for everyone watching this video right now. May you bless them with peace, joy, and breakthroughs in their lives. Amen. Hello, my wonderful family. I am so glad and grateful to have you here with me today. Your support means the world, and I truly don't take it for granted. Before we dive into today's powerful story, please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, drop a comment below to share your thoughts, and of course, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update from this channel. 27 years of living in a dead man's shadow, and I still don't know who the hell I'm supposed to be. Ethan Caldwell's knuckles whitened against the steering wheel as his father's voice echoed from the car radio. Another posthumous interview being replayed on the business news. He reached to turn it off when the screaming cut through the storm. A woman's voice, raw with terror, pierced through the howling wind and rain that had turned the underpass into a churning river. Ethan slammed the brakes, his luxury sedan sliding sideways on the flooded asphalt. Through the sheets of rain, he could barely make out a figure clinging to the roof of a partially submerged car, her dark hair plastered against her face, one hand pressed protectively against her swollen belly. "Help me, please. I can't." Her voice broke as another wave of floodwater crashed against the vehicle, tilting it dangerously. Ethan didn't think. Thinking was what his older brothers did, what board meetings and family lawyers demanded. Thinking was what had kept him trapped in conference rooms while his father's empire crumbled and rebuilt itself around him. This woman was drowning, and her unborn child with her. He kicked off his shoes and dove into the rushing water. The current immediately tried to drag him under, the icy water shocking his system as debris scraped against his arms. The woman, pregnant, alone, terrified, watched him fight his way toward her with eyes that held something he'd never seen before. Not the calculated interest of women who wanted his name or fortune, but genuine desperation mixed with disbelief that someone had actually stopped. "I'm going to get you out," he shouted over the storm, grabbing onto her car's bumper. "What's your name?" "Mia." Her lips were turning blue, her grip on the car roof slipping. "I can't feel my legs." "The baby. The baby's going to be fine. You're both going to be fine." Ethan positioned himself between Mia and the strongest current, creating a human shield as he worked to free her from where her coat had snagged on the car's antenna. "I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" She nodded, and something passed between them in that moment. A connection forged in crisis, pure and immediate. When she let go of the car and wrapped her arms around his neck, Ethan felt the full weight of another person's life in his hands for the first time. The swim back nearly killed them both. Mia's extra weight and the baby's position made every stroke a battle, and twice Ethan thought they wouldn't make it. But somehow they reached his car, somehow he got her inside, somehow he managed to drive through the flooding streets to the nearest hospital while she gripped his hand and whispered prayers in a language he didn't recognize. "Emergency. I need help." Ethan burst through the hospital doors carrying Mia, her unconscious form lighter than he'd expected. "She's pregnant, caught in the flood." The medical team took over immediately, wheeling Mia away on a stretcher while Ethan stood dripping in the sterile hallway, suddenly aware that he was shaking. Not from the cold, but from something else entirely. In 30 minutes, this stranger had made him feel more alive than 3 decades of his carefully orchestrated existence. "Sir?" A nurse appeared at his elbow. "Are you family?" "No, I found her. Rescued her." The words felt inadequate. "Is she going to be okay?" "The doctor will update you soon. But you should know. She's been asking for you. She says her name is Mia Torres, and she wants to thank her guardian angel." Guardian angel. Ethan almost laughed. If this woman knew who he really was, the disappointing heir to a fortune built on secrets his family never discussed, the son who'd spent his entire adult life running from responsibilities he didn't understand, she might not be so grateful. 3 hours later, Mia was awake, her hand resting protectively on her belly while machines monitored the baby's heartbeat. When Ethan knocked softly on her door, her face lit up with a smile that made his chest tighten. "You came back." "Of course I came back." He pulled up a chair beside her bed, noting how she instinctively shifted away when he got too close. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been hit by a truck, but alive. Thanks to you." She studied his face with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "Ethan Caldwell. I looked you up on my phone. You're that Caldwell." "Guilty." He waited for the inevitable change. The way people's expressions shifted when they connected him to his family's name, their warmth replaced by calculation or suspicion. But Mia just nodded thoughtfully. "Rich boy playing hero." That must be a first. Excuse me? I'm sorry, that came out wrong. She touched his arm gently, and he was surprised by the calluses on her fingertips. I meant it as a compliment. Most people with your advantages wouldn't have risked their lives for a stranger. There was something in her voice, a bitter understanding that suggested she knew exactly what advantages looked like. And what they cost. What were you doing out there alone? Ethan asked. In that storm. For just a moment, Mia's composure cracked. Her eyes darted to the window, scanning the parking lot visible below, and her free hand moved to touch something at her throat. A gesture so quick he almost missed it. Running, she said simply. From my past. Before Ethan could ask what that meant, Mia's phone rang. The sound made her entire body go rigid, her face draining of color as she stared at the unknown number on the screen. I have to take this, she whispered, but her hands were trembling so badly she could barely swipe to answer. Mia. The voice that came through the speaker was cultured, controlled, and absolutely deadly. Even from across the room, Ethan could hear the barely contained rage beneath its surface. Did you really think you could disappear? That you could take my child and simply vanish? Ethan watched the woman he'd rescued transform before his eyes. The grateful, vulnerable person he'd pulled from the flood became someone else entirely. Someone who understood exactly how much danger she was in. I'm not coming back, Victor, she said quietly into the phone. Not ever. Oh, my dear wife. You will. Because I know exactly where you are. And I know about your new friend. Ethan Caldwell, isn't it? How perfectly ironic. The line went dead, but the menace in that voice lingered in the hospital room like smoke. Mia's eyes met Ethan's, and he saw his own realization reflected there. Somehow, her husband knew who he was, which meant this rescue hadn't been random at all. Welcome, everyone, to another story that will change how you see the world of fate, choice, and the price of heroism. I'm about to take you on a journey where one moment of compassion unleashes consequences that will test everything you believe about family, loyalty, and love. What Ethan doesn't know yet is that saving Mia Torres wasn't just an act of heroism. It was the first move in a deadly game that's been waiting 20 years to play out. A game where the stakes are higher than he can imagine, and where the woman he rescued holds the key to secrets that could destroy everything his family built. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. First, we need to understand how one phone call is about to turn Ethan's world completely upside down. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Ethan stared at Mia's phone, his mind racing to connect dots that didn't want to fit together. Victor, her husband, a man who somehow knew exactly who Ethan was before they'd ever met. Mia. Ethan's voice was carefully controlled, the tone he'd learned in boardrooms where showing weakness meant losing millions. How does your husband know my name? She was already pulling herself out of the hospital bed, moving with desperate urgency despite the force still taped to her arm. I have to leave. Now. Before he what? Ethan caught her wrist gently, feeling her pulse hammering beneath his fingers. Talk to me. Help me understand what I've walked into. For a moment, Mia's facade cracked completely. The strong, guarded woman dissolved, and Ethan saw someone who'd been running so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to stand still. Her free hand moved protectively to her belly, and when she looked at him, her eyes held 20 years of accumulated fear. My husband is Victor Kozlov, she whispered. And if that name means anything to you, you'll walk away right now and pretend we never met. The blood drained from Ethan's face. Victor Kozlov, the ghost that haunted his family's dinner conversations, spoken about only in whispers when the lawyers weren't around. The man his father had spent the last decade of his life trying to distance the Caldwell empire from, severing ties that went back to the foundation of their fortune. Jesus Christ. Ethan sank into the chair beside her bed. You're married to the Kozlov crime family. Was married, Mia corrected fiercely. I left him 6 months ago when I found out I was pregnant. I couldn't. I won't raise my child in that world. The pieces began falling into place with sickening clarity. The Caldwell family's original fortune hadn't come from legitimate business ventures, despite what the sanitized biographies claimed. His grandfather had built their empire through partnerships with families like the Kozlovs. Money laundering operations disguised as real estate development, shipping companies that moved more than cargo, construction contracts awarded through intimidation rather than bidding. Ethan's father had spent 20 years trying to legitimize their wealth, buying respectability through charity work and political donations. But men like Victor Kozlov had long memories and debts that transcended generations. This isn't random, Ethan said slowly. You didn't just happen to be in that underpass. Victor knew I'd be driving that route. No. Mia's denial came too quickly, too forcefully. I was running, trying to get to the airport. The storm caught me and my car. Mia. Ethan's voice was gentle but implacable. You said Victor knows about your new friend. How could he know about me unless this was planned? Before she could answer, the hospital room door opened. Dr. Sarah Chin entered with a clipboard, her expression professionally neutral. But Ethan caught something else in her eyes, a flicker of recognition that made his skin crawl. Ms. Torres, I have your discharge papers ready, Dr. Chin said smoothly. Though I do recommend staying another night for observation, given the trauma you've experienced. I'm fine, Mia said quickly. I need to leave. Of course. Dr. Chen's smile was perfectly practiced. Mr. Caldwell, might I have a word with you privately? About the insurance documentation for Ms. Torres's care. Every instinct Ethan had developed through years of family business screamed danger. The way Dr. Chen avoided direct eye contact, the slight tremor in her hands as she held the clipboard, the fact that she'd addressed him by name despite never being introduced. Actually, I think Mia and I will handle the paperwork together, Ethan said carefully, moving to stand beside the bed. I'm afraid that won't be possible. Dr. Chen's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. Hospital policy requires. The lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, bathing the room in an eerie red glow, but in those few seconds of darkness, everything changed. Ethan heard the soft whisper of Dr. Chen's coat as she moved, the barely audible click of something metallic, and Mia's sharp intake of breath. When the auxiliary power stabilized, Dr. Chen was standing by the window with a gun pointed directly at Mia's heart. Hospital policy, she said conversationally, requires that all of Viktor Kozlov's property be returned to him undamaged. Property? Ethan's voice was deadly quiet. She's pregnant. She's a human being. She's a Kozlov wife who stole something that doesn't belong to her. Dr. Chen's gun never wavered. Mr. Caldwell, your family has a complicated history with ours. Your father was smart enough to honor his debts. I trust you'll be equally pragmatic. The betrayal hit Ethan like a physical blow. Dr. Chen wasn't just some random doctor. She was part of Victor's network, planted in the hospital specifically to intercept Mia if she ever sought medical help. Which meant Victor had been tracking his wife's movements, predicting her desperation, using her pregnancy as leverage. But it also meant something else. Something that made Ethan's blood run cold. You knew I'd be the one to find her, he said slowly. This whole thing was orchestrated. The storm, the flooding, even the route I took home from my father's memorial service. Dr. Chen's smile was genuinely appreciative. Victor always said Caldwell men were smarter than they let on. Yes, Mr. Caldwell. You were specifically chosen for this moment. Your act of heroism, your growing attachment to a damsel in distress, it's all been carefully cultivated. Why? Mia's voice was barely a whisper, her hand pressed protectively against her belly. Why use Ethan? Because, my dear, your husband has a very long memory, and the Caldwell family owes him something far more valuable than money. Dr. Chen glanced at Ethan with something that might have been pity. They owe him a son. The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. A son. Not money, not business favors, not even Mia's return. Viktor Kozlov wanted him. 27 years ago, Dr. Chen continued conversationally, as if discussing the weather rather than holding a pregnant woman at gunpoint. Your father made a promise to Victor's father. A blood oath, sealed with a handshake and witnessed by men who are now dead. If the Caldwell fortune ever reached a certain threshold, if your family ever achieved true legitimacy, you would honor that debt. What debt? Ethan's mind was racing, trying to remember fragments of conversations he'd overheard as a child, whispered arguments between his parents late at night. Your grandfather killed Victor's uncle in 1987. Made it look like a business rival's hit, but Victor's family knew the truth. The only reason they didn't destroy the Caldwells then, and there was because your father offered something more valuable than revenge. Dr. Chen's gun shifted slightly, and Ethan realized she was equally prepared to shoot him if necessary. He offered his youngest son, as collateral, as insurance that the Caldwell family would never betray the Kozlovs again. Mia's horrified gasp cut through the air. You're talking about selling a person. About slavery. I'm talking about honor, Dr. Chen corrected coolly. About debts that transcend generations. Mr. Caldwell's father spent 20 years building legitimate wealth, specifically, so his sons would never have to honor that agreement. But then he died, didn't he? And all those careful protections died with him. Ethan felt the walls of his entire life crumbling around him. Every privilege he'd enjoyed, every advantage his family name had provided, had been built on a foundation of blood and borrowed time. His father hadn't been protecting the family fortune. He'd been protecting his children from becoming property. So what now? Ethan asked quietly. Victor gets his wife back and collects on a 30-year-old debt? Oh, it's much more elegant than that. Dr. Chen's smile was genuinely proud. Victor gets his wife back, yes. But you? You get to choose. Honor your father's debt willingly, and Mia and her child live. Continue this foolish rescue fantasy, and 3 people die tonight instead of just 1. The choice was designed to break him, and Ethan could see exactly how carefully it had been crafted. Save the woman he'd developed feelings for by sacrificing his freedom, or watch her die knowing he could have prevented it. Either way, Victor won. But as Ethan looked at Mia, really looked at her, he noticed something Dr. Chen had missed. While the doctor had been explaining the intricacies of 30-year-old blood oaths, Mia had been slowly working the 4 needle from her arm. And now, as she met Ethan's eyes, he saw not fear but calculation. She'd been married to a monster for years. She knew how predators thought, and she was done running. Actually, Mia said conversationally, I think there's a 4th option you haven't considered. Before Dr. Chen could react, Mia drove the 4 needle deep into the doctor's wrist, hitting the pressure point that would cause her hand to spasm open. The gun clattered to the floor as Dr. Chen screamed, and Ethan dove for the weapon. But the betrayal was only beginning. As Ethan's fingers closed around the gun, the hospital room door burst open, and 4 men in suits flooded in. Not security guards or police, but Victor's people, moving with military precision. In the chaos that followed, as Ethan tried to shield Mia from the advancing men while fumbling with an unfamiliar weapon, one terrible truth became clear. The hospital had been a trap from the beginning. Dr. Chen's supposed betrayal, the dramatic revelation about family debts, even Mia's desperate fight, it had all been theater, designed to make Ethan feel like he was choosing his own fate. Because men like Viktor Kozlov understood that the most effective prisons were the ones people built for themselves. And Ethan had just locked himself inside. The gun felt impossibly heavy in Ethan's hands as Victor's men surrounded them. But instead of advancing, they simply stood there, weapons drawn but not aimed, creating a perfect circle of contained violence. Waiting. Lower the weapon, Mr. Caldwell. The voice came from the doorway, cultured and calm. There's no need for anyone to get hurt. Viktor Kozlov stepped into the hospital room like he owned it, which Ethan realized with growing dread, he probably did. The man was nothing like the monster Ethan had imagined. Tall and lean, wearing an expensive suit that spoke of legitimate business rather than criminal enterprise, Victor could have been any successful executive visiting a sick relative. Except for his eyes. His eyes held the kind of cold intelligence that had built empires on other people's bones. Hello, darling. Victor's gaze found Mia with the casual possessiveness of someone cataloging their belongings. You look well. Pregnancy suits you. Stay away from me. Mia pressed herself against the hospital bed's headboard, one hand protectively covering her belly. I won't go back, Victor. I'll die first. That can be arranged, Victor said mildly, then turned his attention to Ethan. Though I'd prefer it didn't come to that. Mr. Caldwell, I believe we have business to discuss. Business? Ethan kept the gun trained on Victor, though he was acutely aware that 4 other weapons were pointed at his head. You mean the part where you orchestrated an elaborate kidnapping scheme to collect on a debt my father never told me existed? Victor's laugh was genuinely amused. Kidnapping? My dear boy, I'm here to offer you a job. The words hung in the air like a challenge to everything Ethan thought he understood about the situation. He glanced at Mia, seeing his own confusion reflected in her eyes. Whatever game Victor was playing, it was more complex than simple revenge. I don't understand, Ethan said carefully. Of course you don't. Your father was very careful to keep you ignorant of the family's true business. Victor walked to the window, gazing out at the storm that was finally beginning to subside. Tell me, what do you know about Caldwell Industries' shipping operations? We move legitimate cargo. Consumer goods, technology, raw materials. Ethan recited the corporate line he'd heard in dozens of board meetings. How wonderfully naive. Victor turned back to face him, and for the first time, Ethan saw something approaching respect in the older man's expression. Your family currently moves $2.3 billion worth of my merchandise through your shipping network every year. Has been for 2 decades. The revelation hit Ethan like cold water. That's impossible. My father legitimized the business. He cut all ties with the visible operations, yes. But money has a way of finding the most efficient channels, regardless of the moral scruples of the people facilitating its movement. Victor's tone was almost pedagogical. Your father was brilliant, really. He created such a clean, respectable front that even his own son believes it's legitimate. Ethan's mind raced, trying to process the implications. If Victor was telling the truth, then everything Ethan knew about his family's business was a lie. Worse, it meant he'd been unknowingly complicit in criminal operations for years. Why are you telling me this? Ethan demanded. Because 3 days ago, the FBI raided one of my warehouses in Baltimore. They found shipping manifests with Caldwell Industries' corporate seal, bills of lading signed by your head of operations, and enough evidence to trace $400 million in transactions directly back to your family's accounts. The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. A federal investigation. His family's name connected to criminal evidence. Everything his father had worked to build, all the legitimate business and charitable work, would be destroyed in the media firestorm that followed. The investigation is being led by Special Agent Jennifer Martinez, Victor continued conversationally. Perhaps you know her? I believe she attended your father's funeral. Ethan's blood turned to ice. He did know Jennifer Martinez. She'd been his girlfriend for 6 months, ending their relationship only 3 weeks ago with vague explanations about career complications and needing space. At the time, he'd assumed she was intimidated by his family's wealth. Now he understood she'd been building a case against him. You see my dilemma, Victor said, settling into the chair beside Mia's bed with casual familiarity. My business operations are about to be exposed, along with your family's involvement. Unless, of course, someone with access to Caldwell Industries' computer systems could ensure that certain files disappear before they can be subpoenaed. You want me to destroy evidence, Ethan said flatly. I want you to honor your family's commitments. Your father agreed to provide certain services in exchange for my protection. Now that he's gone, that responsibility falls to you. And if I refuse? Victor's expression didn't change, but something deadly flickered in his eyes. Then tomorrow morning, Agent Martinez receives an anonymous tip about additional evidence hidden in your family's estate. Evidence that would implicate not just your father, but your brothers as well. David's political career would end in handcuffs, and Michael's investment firm would collapse under federal scrutiny. The trap was perfect. Ethan could sacrifice himself to protect his family, or watch Victor destroy everything the Caldwell name represented. But there was still one piece that didn't fit. What does Mia have to do with any of this? Ethan asked. Why the elaborate rescue scenario? For the first time since entering the room, Victor's composure cracked slightly. When he looked at his wife, Ethan saw something he hadn't expected: genuine pain. Because Mia discovered the Baltimore warehouse 3 weeks before the FBI raid, Victor said quietly. She saw the shipping manifests, connected the dots about Caldwell Industries' involvement, and realized what would happen when the investigation began. Mia's face had gone pale. Victor, you can't. She came to me with a proposal, Victor continued, overriding his wife's protest. Disappear for a few months, let me handle the federal investigation quietly, and then return after the heat died down. She thought she was protecting our unborn child from the chaos that was coming. Understanding dawned on Ethan with sickening clarity. But she was protecting me too. If she'd stayed, you would have used her as leverage against me months ago. Clever boy. Yes, Mia's little vanishing act complicated my plans considerably. I needed Caldwell cooperation to manage the federal investigation, but I also needed to ensure my wife's safety. The rescue scenario served both purposes. It brought you together under circumstances that would create emotional attachment, while putting Mia somewhere I could protect her. Ethan stared at the woman he'd risked his life to save, seeing her with completely new eyes. She hadn't been running from her husband's violence. She'd been trying to shield Ethan from becoming a casualty in her marriage. The car accident was real, Mia said softly, meeting his gaze. I was trying to get to the airport, to disappear completely. I never meant for you to get involved. But I did get involved, Ethan said. And now? Now you have a choice, Victor replied. Help me clean up this mess, keep your family's secrets buried, and everyone walks away safely. or maintain your moral high ground while watching everything you've ever cared about burn to the ground? Before Ethan could respond, his phone buzzed with an incoming text. The message was from his brother David, and the preview was enough to make his heart stop. FBI at the house. They have warrants. Call me. Victor's smile was genuinely sympathetic. I'm afraid Agent Martinez has decided not to wait for my cooperation. The raids are happening now. Your family estate, your brother's offices, Caldwell Industries headquarters. By tomorrow morning, every news outlet in the country will be running stories about the Caldwell crime family. The point of no return had arrived with the cold efficiency of a blade between the ribs. Ethan could maintain his principles and watch his family's legacy collapse in real time, or he could cross a line that would change him forever. But as he looked at Mia, really looked at her, he realized the choice had been made the moment he jumped into that flood to save her. She was carrying a child into this world, a child who would either grow up knowing safety and love, or become another casualty in an endless cycle of violence and revenge. What exactly do you need me to do? Ethan asked quietly. Victor's smile was triumphant, but when Ethan glanced at Mia, he saw something else in her expression. Not relief, but a deep, abiding sadness that made his chest tighten. Because she understood what he was only beginning to grasp. In agreeing to help Victor, Ethan wasn't just compromising his principles. He was choosing to become the kind of man who could live with the consequences of those compromises. And once that transformation began, there was no way back to the person he'd been before he'd heard her screaming in the storm. First, Victor said, pulling out a tablet and opening what looked like building schematics, we're going to pay a visit to Caldwell Industries. Tonight, before the FBI expands their search to include the executive server room. As Ethan studied the plans for breaking into his own family's building, he felt the last pieces of his old life crumbling away. Tomorrow, if this worked, he would wake up as someone new. Someone who could carry the weight of secrets that could destroy lives. Someone who belonged in Victor Kozlov's world. The storm outside had ended, but the one inside Ethan's heart was just beginning. The Caldwell Industries building rose 43 stories into the midnight sky, its gleaming facade reflecting the city lights like a monument to legitimate success. Ethan had walked through its marble lobby thousands of times, attended board meetings in its glass-walled conference rooms, even brought dates to company parties in the executive dining room. Tonight, he was breaking in like a common criminal. The security system resets at 2:47 a.m. for automated backup cycles, he whispered into the communication device Victor had given him. That gives us exactly 90 seconds to reach the server room undetected. Copy that. Victor's voice crackled back through the earpiece. Remember, Mr. Caldwell, you're not just deleting files. You're rebuilding your family's future. Ethan crouched in the building's underground parking garage beside Mia, who had insisted on coming despite Victor's initial protests. She'd argued that her presence would provide additional insurance. If they were caught, a pregnant woman would generate sympathy that might buy them precious time. The logic was sound, but Ethan suspected her real motivation was something else entirely. You don't have to do this, he said quietly, watching her adjust the small backpack containing the portable hard drives they'd need to copy files before deletion. Victor's men could handle the technical aspects. Yes, I do. Mia's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she checked the building schematics on her phone. This is my fault, Ethan. If I hadn't tried to run, if I'd just stayed and dealt with Victor's business problems myself. You were protecting your child. Any parent would have done the same thing. The words hung between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to acknowledge. In the past 6 hours, something had shifted in their dynamic. The crisis had stripped away pretense, revealing a connection that went beyond circumstance. When Mia looked at him, Ethan saw not just gratitude but genuine care. When he touched her hand to steady her as they'd climbed down into the parking garage, the contact had lasted longer than necessary. They were falling for each other in the middle of a nightmare, and both knew it. Elevator shaft access is 30 feet to your left. Victor's voice interrupted through their earpieces. Remember, physical contact only when absolutely necessary. The building's motion sensors are disabled, but thermal imaging remains active. Ethan led the way through the garage's shadows, hyper-aware of Mia's breathing behind him. The service elevator that accessed the building's utility levels required a special keycard, one that Ethan's executive status provided, though using it would create an electronic trail directly to him. Once I swipe this card, there's no going back, he murmured to Mia. Victor will have everything he needs to implicate me if this goes wrong. It won't go wrong. Her confidence surprised him. You know this building better than anyone. And I know Victor's security protocols better than he thinks I do. The elevator ride to the 38th floor took 90 seconds that felt like hours. Ethan found himself studying Mia's reflection in the polished steel doors, noting the way she unconsciously protected her belly with one hand while maintaining perfect posture despite the stress. She was stronger than he'd initially realized, not just physically but mentally. Life with Viktor Kozlov had forged her into someone who could function under extreme pressure without breaking. Server room is straight ahead, past the executive conference area, Ethan whispered as the elevator doors opened onto the darkened hallway. But we need to disable the backup camera system first. They moved through the familiar space like ghosts, Ethan's intimate knowledge of the building's layout allowing them to avoid the primary security corridors. But with each step, the weight of what he was doing settled more heavily on his shoulders. These weren't just files he was about to destroy. They were evidence of crimes that would continue, victims who would never see justice, a system of corruption that would remain intact. Ethan. Mia caught his arm as they reached the server room's reinforced door. Before we go in there, I need to tell you something. What? Victor didn't tell you everything about why I left. Her eyes were luminous in the emergency lighting, holding secrets that made his chest tighten. The Baltimore warehouse, the FBI investigation, that's all true. But there's something else. Before she could continue, the building's lights blazed to life around them. Emergency alarms began wailing, and Ethan's blood turned to ice as he realized what had happened. Motion sensors were never disabled, he breathed. This was another setup. Victor's laughter echoed through their earpieces, no longer friendly but coldly triumphant. Very good, Mr. Caldwell. You're learning to think like a criminal. Yes, the motion sensors were active the entire time. Building security has been tracking your movement since you entered the parking garage. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the conference room, Ethan could see FBI vehicles surrounding the building, their red and blue lights painting the glass walls in shifting colors. Agent Jennifer Martinez stood beside the lead vehicle, speaking rapidly into a radio while pointing toward the 38th floor. You son of a bitch, Ethan snarled into his earpiece. You set us up. I created an opportunity, Victor corrected smoothly. You see, the FBI needed someone to blame for the evidence they've been collecting. Someone with access to Caldwell Industries systems. Someone with motive to destroy incriminating files. You've just provided them with both. The trap was breathtaking in its complexity. Victor hadn't needed Ethan to actually delete the files. He'd needed him to be caught trying to delete them. Now the FBI would have a clear narrative. Grieving son discovers family's criminal connections, attempts to destroy evidence, gets caught in the act. It would tie up their investigation in a neat package while deflecting attention from Victor's continued operations. But why involve Mia? Ethan demanded, even as he heard the stairwell doors burst open far below them. Why risk your wife and child? Because, my dear boy, Mia has been working with the FBI for 6 months. The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. He turned to stare at Mia, seeing the truth written in her expression. Guilt, pain, and something that might have been love. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry, Ethan. The pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. Mia hadn't been running from Victor. She'd been running to the FBI. Her pregnancy had complicated an undercover operation designed to gather evidence against the Kozlov family. The rescue and the flood had been genuine, but everything else had been part of an elaborate sting operation designed to catch both Victor and the Caldwell family in one carefully orchestrated net. How long? Ethan asked quietly, surprised by how calm his voice sounded. How long have you been working with them? Since I found out about the Baltimore warehouse. Tears were streaming down Mia's face, but her voice remained steady. Victor killed 3 people to cover up that operation, Ethan. 3 innocent dock workers who saw too much. I couldn't be part of that anymore. The sound of footsteps in the stairwell was getting closer. FBI agents, moving with tactical precision, closing in on their location. In minutes, Ethan would be in handcuffs, his life destroyed by choices he'd made trying to protect people who had been deceiving him from the beginning. But as he looked at Mia, really looked at her, he realized something that changed everything. You're not just working with the FBI, he said slowly. You're in love with your handler. Mia's face crumpled. Agent Martinez is. She's been protecting me. When I came forward about Victor's operations, she made sure I stayed safe. The baby. Understanding crashed over Ethan like a tidal wave. The baby Mia was carrying, the child he'd risked everything to protect, wasn't Victor's at all. It was Jennifer Martinez's. Mia hadn't been running from an abusive husband, but from a criminal organization while carrying the child of the FBI agent investigating that organization. Jesus Christ, Ethan breathed. The whole thing, the rescue, the hospital, Victor's dramatic arrival, it was all theater. You and Martinez needed a way to get evidence of Victor's operations while protecting your relationship and the baby. It wasn't supposed to involve you, Mia said desperately. When you pulled me from that flood, when you showed up at the hospital, that was real. My feelings for you, the connection we made, that was all real. The stairwell door burst open and tactical gear-clad FBI agents poured into the hallway. But instead of the relief Ethan expected to feel, he found himself filled with a different kind of desperation. Because he'd realized something that neither Mia nor Agent Martinez had anticipated. Victor Kozlov was too smart to be caught by a simple sting operation, which meant everything that had happened tonight, including Mia's apparent betrayal, was part of an even larger game. Mia, Ethan said urgently, grabbing her hand as the agents approached. If the baby is Jennifer's, and you've been working with the FBI for 6 months, then who authorized tonight's operation? Her face went white as the implications hit her. Jennifer said it came from the top. Federal prosecutors, Homeland Security approval. With no oversight? No backup agents? No extraction plan. Ethan's mind was racing, seeing patterns that made his blood run cold. Mia, I don't think you're working with the FBI anymore. I think you're working for Victor, and you don't even know it. Before she could respond, the tactical team reached them. But instead of FBI agents, the faces behind the masks were unfamiliar. Professional, cold, and carrying weapons that weren't standard federal issue. Ms. Kozlov, the team leader said politely to Mia. Mr. Kozlov is waiting for you downstairs. He's very eager to discuss your recent career change. As the fake agents surrounded them, Ethan realized that Victor's final gambit was only just beginning. The FBI investigation, Mia's supposed betrayal, even Agent Martinez's involvement. It had all been orchestrated by a man who understood that the most effective way to control people was to let them think they were making their own choices. And now, with both Ethan and Mia completely isolated from any real help, Victor was ready to collect on debts that went far deeper than either of them had imagined. The fake Agent Martinez stepped out of the shadows at the end of the hallway, and when she removed her tactical helmet, Ethan saw not the woman he'd once loved, but a complete stranger with cold eyes and Victor's smile. "Hello, darling," she said to Mia in a voice that was nothing like Jennifer's. "Your husband is very disappointed in your recent choices. But don't worry, he's prepared to be quite forgiving, once you've learned your place." As they were led toward the elevators at gunpoint, Ethan caught Mia's hand one last time. Whatever happened next, whatever Victor's ultimate plan might be, there was one thing Ethan knew with absolute certainty. He was going to get Mia and her unborn child out of this alive, even if it cost him everything. Because sometimes the only way to honor your principles was to break them in service of something more important than your own moral purity. The elevator descended in suffocating silence, carrying them past floors Ethan had never seen before. Sub-basements that shouldn't have existed in a building he thought he knew intimately. The fake tactical team flanked them with professional efficiency, while the woman wearing Jennifer Martinez's face studied Mia with predatory interest. "You know," the false Jennifer said conversationally, "Victor spent months perfecting my performance. Voice coaching, mannerisms, even studying Agent Martinez's psychological profile from her academy training. The hardest part was learning to replicate her tells when she was lying to you." Ethan's world tilted sideways. "When she was lying to me about what?" "About loving you, of course." The woman's smile was Jennifer's, but the cruelty behind it was purely alien. "The real Agent Martinez has been dead for 4 months, Mr. Caldwell. Killed in a car accident that Victor arranged after she got too close to his Baltimore operation." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. Jennifer, the woman he'd shared his bed, his secrets, his growing feelings about family and legacy, had been murdered. The person he'd been grieving for the past 3 weeks hadn't even existed. "But the relationship," Ethan said numbly. 6 months of dinners, conversations, intimacy. All carefully orchestrated by Victor's behavioral analysts. "We studied your psychological profile, your romantic history, your daddy issues and trust problems. Jennifer Martinez was designed specifically to appeal to your particular neuroses. The false agent's voice carried Jennifer's inflection perfectly, making the betrayal feel like a desecration. You fell in love with a ghost, Mr. Caldwell. A ghost designed to fall in love with you back. Beside him, Mia made a sound that was half sob, half rage. My God, Victor. How long? How long have you been manipulating all of us? The elevator stopped with a soft chime, and the doors opened onto a space that shouldn't have existed. A fully equipped command center hidden beneath Caldwell Industries, complete with wall-mounted monitors, computer stations, and enough surveillance equipment to coordinate a military operation. Victor stood at the center of it all, but he wasn't alone. Ethan's blood turned to ice as he recognized the other figures gathered around the central conference table. David Caldwell, his oldest brother, looked up from a tablet displaying financial charts with an expression of mild annoyance. Michael Caldwell, the middle brother, was reviewing what appeared to be shipping manifests while speaking quietly into a satellite phone. Finally, David said, checking his watch. We've been waiting for 20 minutes. The Seoul operation starts in 3 hours, and we still need to coordinate the Baltimore cleanup. Ethan stared at his brothers, the siblings he'd looked up to his entire life, the family members he'd been willing to sacrifice himself to protect, and felt his entire sense of reality collapse. You're working with him, Ethan said slowly. You're both working with Victor. Working with him? Michael laughed, ending his phone call and turning his attention to Ethan. Little brother, we are the operation. Victor's been our partner for 15 years. Why do you think Father's business grew so dramatically after 2010? The revelations came like hammer blows, each one more devastating than the last. David stepped forward with the patient expression he'd always used when explaining complex business concepts to his youngest brother. Ethan, do you remember when Father had his first heart attack? When we had to take over most of his day-to-day operations? That was 2009, Ethan said numbly. That was when we realized the legitimate business model was never going to generate the kind of wealth needed to maintain our lifestyle. So we reached out to some of Father's old contacts. Rebuilt relationships that he'd spent years trying to sever. The shipping contracts, the real estate development, even the charitable foundation, it's all been a front for money laundering operations that span 6 continents, Michael added. Victor's organization provides the capital and protection, we provide the infrastructure and respectability. Ethan's legs gave out, and he sank into a chair as the full scope of his family's deception crashed over him. Father knew. Father suspected, David said gently. But he was dying, and he knew we needed to secure the family's future. He chose to ask no questions as long as we kept you out of it. The will provisions, the trust fund restrictions, even your executive position that kept you away from certain departments, it was all designed to maintain your ignorance and therefore your innocence, Victor added, approaching with something that might have been sympathy. Your father loved you too much to let you become what your brothers chose to become. The betrayal was complete, devastating in its intimacy. Ethan's entire adult life had been carefully managed to keep him ignorant of his family's true business, while making him complicit enough to be useful as a front man. Every board meeting where he'd been excluded from certain discussions, every decision made without his input, every time his brothers had shared meaningful looks across conference tables, it had all been part of maintaining the lie. But then Father died, Ethan said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. And you needed me to be more involved. The federal investigation changed everything, Michael explained. We needed someone with genuine emotional investment in protecting the family name. Someone who would make the kind of desperate choices that would sell our narrative to law enforcement. So you created the perfect scenario, Ethan continued, his voice hollow. A rescue situation that would make me feel heroic, a woman in danger who would trigger my protective instincts, a criminal husband who would make me feel justified in breaking the law to stop him. The psychological profile was remarkably accurate, Victor said with genuine pride. You responded exactly as predicted. The rescue and the flood, the growing attachment to Mia, the willingness to compromise your principles to protect her. Textbook hero complex combined with abandonment issues and unresolved paternal grief. Ethan looked at Mia, searching her face for some sign that she hadn't been part of this elaborate manipulation. What he saw there made his heart break all over again. You knew, he whispered. All of it. You knew about my brothers, about the fake Jennifer, about the whole operation. Tears were streaming down Mia's face, but she nodded. I've been Victor's partner for 7 years, Ethan. Not his wife, his business partner. The marriage was a cover story, just like everything else. The final piece of Ethan's constructed reality crumbled away. "The baby is Victor's," she said quietly. "But not in the way you think. We used IVF, clinical and businesslike. The pregnancy was timed specifically for this operation, to give me a reason to run, to make you feel protective, to create the emotional stakes that would drive your decisions." Ethan felt something inside himself break, not just his heart, but his fundamental understanding of human nature, of trust, of love itself. Every genuine emotion he'd experienced over the past 24 hours had been carefully cultivated and manipulated by people who understood his psychology better than he did. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why go to all this trouble? Why not just tell me the truth and ask for my cooperation?" "Because truth is unreliable," Victor said simply. "People who know they're being manipulated can choose to resist. But people who think they're making their own choices, following their own moral compass, protecting people they love, they'll do anything, including things they would never do if they understood the real situation." "And now you understand the real situation," David said, pulling up a chair across from his youngest brother. "The federal investigation is real, Ethan. The evidence against our operations is genuine. If we don't take decisive action in the next 48 hours, everything Father built will be destroyed, and all of us will spend the rest of our lives in federal prison. Including you," Michael added pointedly. "Your electronic signature is on half the shipping manifests they've subpoenaed. Your access codes were used to transfer the funds they're tracking. Whether you knew it or not, you've been an integral part of our operations for years." The trap was perfect, and Ethan could see exactly how they intended to use it. His brothers and Victor had created a scenario where his only choices were cooperation or mutual destruction. They'd stripped away his illusions, his support systems, and his moral certainty, leaving him with nothing but the raw necessity of survival. But as Ethan sat in that underground command center, surrounded by the ruins of everything he'd believed about his life, one thought kept echoing in his mind. If everything had been a lie, his relationship with Jennifer, his rescue of Mia, even his brother's love, then what did he actually have left to lose? "There's something you haven't considered," Ethan said quietly, standing up from his chair with newfound resolve. "What's that?" Victor asked. "If I've been unknowingly complicit in your operations for years, if my electronic signatures and access codes are already scattered throughout your evidence trail, then I'm already beyond saving." Ethan's voice grew stronger as he spoke. "Which means I have absolutely nothing left to lose by bringing this entire operation down around your heads." The silence that followed was profound. For the first time since entering the room, Victor looked genuinely surprised. "You would destroy your own family?" David asked incredulously. "What family?" Ethan's laugh was bitter. "You mean the brothers who've been lying to me for 15 years? The business that's been using me as an unwitting front man? The fortune that's built on blood and suffering?" He turned to Mia, seeing her clearly for the first time. "And you? Did any of it mean anything to you? The rescue, the hospital, the moments when we connected, was any of it real?" Mia's composure finally cracked completely. "It was all real for me," she whispered. "Every second, every touch, every time I looked at you and saw someone decent in a world full of monsters. That was real. The operation was fake, but my feelings weren't." "Then prove it," Ethan said simply. "Help me burn it all down." The choice hung in the air between them, loaded with impossible consequences. But for the first time in 24 hours, Ethan felt like he was making a decision based on his own values rather than someone else's manipulation. And if that choice destroyed him, at least it would be his destruction to own. The command center erupted in chaos. Victor's men moved with lethal precision, weapons drawn and trained on Ethan while his brothers scrambled to secure the computer terminals. But Mia stepped between Ethan and the guns, her hands raised in a gesture that was both surrender and protection. "Wait," she called out, her voice cutting through the tension. "Just wait." "Mia, step away from him," Victor said quietly, his earlier composure replaced by something far more dangerous. "You've done your job brilliantly, but this is where it ends." "No." Mia's voice was steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Ethan's right. About all of it." David Caldwell's face went white. "Mia, you don't understand what you're saying. If Ethan follows through on this suicide mission, it destroys everyone in this room, including you and your baby. Maybe that's what needs to happen." Mia's hand moved protectively to her belly, but her eyes remained fixed on Victor. "Maybe some things are too broken to fix. The silence that followed was thick with the weight of 7 years of lies finally coming to light. Ethan watched Mia's face, seeing the exact moment when she stopped being Victor's partner and became something else entirely. A woman who'd lost herself so completely in deception that truth felt like a form of salvation, even if it meant destruction. "You can't be serious," Michael said, his carefully modulated voice cracking for the first time Ethan could remember. "Mia, the federal investigation will expose everything. Our shipping operations, the money laundering, the protection rackets. 15 years of carefully built infrastructure will collapse overnight." "Good," Mia replied simply. "Let it collapse." Victor's laugh was genuinely appreciative, but there was no warmth in it. "How wonderfully naive. Both of you. Do you have any idea what happens when an operation of this magnitude unravels? It's not just us who pay the price." He gestured to one of the wall-mounted monitors, which flickered to life, showing a live feed from what appeared to be a warehouse district. Ethan's stomach dropped as he recognized the location. The Baltimore facility where this whole nightmare had started. 47 people work in that building. Victor continued conversationally. Dock workers, security guards, administrative staff. Most of them have no idea what's really being shipped through their facility. When the federal investigation expands to include that location, what do you think happens to witnesses who can tie our operations to specific dates and manifests? The implication hit Ethan like cold water. "You'll kill them all." "I'll protect my business interests," Victor corrected. "Just like I've been doing for 20 years. The difference is that now, thanks to your moral awakening, protecting those interests requires a much higher body count." Michael stepped forward, his face a mask of desperate calculation. "Ethan, listen to me. We can still contain this. The FBI investigation is focused on the Baltimore operation, not our entire network. If we cooperate with Victor's cleanup protocol, give them a few sacrificial targets, we can preserve 90% of our infrastructure." Sacrificial targets like the 47 innocent people working in that warehouse. "Like people who knew the risks when they took jobs in Victor's organization," David said bluntly. "This isn't a legitimate business, little brother. It never was. People die when criminal enterprises get exposed. That's the reality we've been protecting you from your entire adult life." The moral landscape shifted beneath Ethan's feet like quicksand. His choice wasn't between good and evil anymore. It was between different kinds of evil, different calculations of acceptable casualties. Cooperate with Victor and become complicit in mass murder, or expose the operation and trigger those same murders through federal investigation. "There's a third option," Mia said quietly, her voice cutting through Ethan's internal struggle. "We disappear. All of us. Tonight." Victor's expression shifted to something approaching admiration. "Elaborate." "The shipping network spans 6 continents, with legitimate business fronts in dozens of countries. We could vanish into that infrastructure, take new identities, start over somewhere the FBI can't reach us." Mia's voice grew stronger as she spoke. "Abandon the Baltimore operation, let the investigation consume it, but preserve the core network under different management." "And the witnesses?" Ethan asked. "Relocated, not eliminated. We have resources Victor's never used because murder was always easier than logistics." Mia turned to face her partner, former partner, with steel in her voice. "You've been so focused on controlling through fear that you forgot you could control through opportunity." For a moment, hope flickered in the underground chamber. The plan had elegance, practicality, even a twisted form of mercy that might allow everyone to survive with their humanity partially intact. Then Victor started laughing. "Oh, my dear Mia, you still don't understand." His voice carried the patient cruelty of someone explaining reality to a child. "There is no we anymore. There is no partnership to preserve or abandon." He nodded to one of his men, who stepped forward with a tablet displaying medical records. Mia's face appeared on the screen. Ultrasound images, blood work, genetic analysis. "The baby you're carrying isn't mine," Victor said conversationally. "The IVF procedure was theater, designed to sell the pregnancy timeline to Ethan's psychological profile. But the actual pregnancy? That happened 6 months ago, during your relationship with Agent Martinez." The words hit like a physical blow. Ethan stared at Mia, seeing the truth written in her expression, shock, horror, and the dawning realization of how completely she'd been manipulated. "Jennifer Martinez was a real FBI agent," Victor continued. "She was investigating our operations, and yes, she was building a relationship with you, Mia, trying to turn you into an informant. What she didn't know was that I'd been monitoring her investigation for months, feeding her carefully selected information to control the scope of what she discovered. Mia's legs gave out, and she sank into a chair as the implications crashed over her. The relationship was real. Jennifer and I were genuine lovers, yes, which made it so much easier to arrange her death once she'd served her purpose. The car accident happened 3 days after her final report identified you as a potential asset. I simply couldn't risk her extracting you from my organization. The revelation shattered something fundamental in Mia's composure. She'd thought she was choosing between different forms of loyalty, to Victor, to the FBI, to her unborn child. Now she understood she'd been grieving a murdered lover while carrying that woman's child, unknowingly working for the man who'd killed her. The pregnancy complicated things initially, Victor admitted, but my analysts realized it could be used to create even stronger emotional leverage. A pregnant woman in danger, carrying the child of a murdered federal agent? Irresistible to someone with Ethan's psychological profile. Ethan felt the last pieces of his constructed reality crumble away. So when I rescued Mia from the flood, you were rescuing a woman carrying a dead FBI agent's baby from a situation I'd orchestrated to test your reflexes. Everything else, your growing attachment, your willingness to compromise your principles, your brother's apparent cooperation, was simply building on that foundation. The true scope of Victor's manipulation was breathtaking. He hadn't just deceived Ethan about the current situation. He'd constructed an entire false reality spanning months, complete with murdered federal agents, fake relationships, and a pregnancy timeline designed to maximize emotional impact. But why? Mia whispered, her voice barely audible. Why go to all this trouble? Because 20 years ago, your lover Agent Martinez wasn't the first federal investigator to get close to our operations. Her father was. Victor's smile was genuinely fond, as if remembering a pleasant memory. Special Agent Robert Martinez spent 3 years building a case against the Caldwell family's money laundering operations. He died in a car accident 2 weeks before he was scheduled to testify before a federal grand jury. The final piece clicked into place with devastating clarity. Jennifer Martinez was investigating her father's death, Ethan said slowly. Jennifer Martinez was trying to finish what her father started. And her daughter, Victor gestured toward Mia's belly, will grow up to continue that legacy, unless we ensure she's raised with proper guidance about the dangers of pursuing family vendettas. The choice crystallized with horrible clarity. Victor wasn't just offering them survival. He was offering to raise a dead FBI agent's child as his own, ensuring that the next generation of the Martinez family would serve his interests rather than threaten them. You're insane, Ethan breathed. I'm thorough, Victor corrected. The question now is whether you're smart enough to recognize that this was never about your family's money laundering operations or my shipping network. This was about ensuring that the Martinez family's crusade against organized crime dies with this generation. As if summoned by his words, the wall monitors flickered to life, showing multiple locations. The Baltimore warehouse, Caldwell Industries headquarters, even the hospital where they'd first taken Mia. Each location was surrounded by federal vehicles, tactical teams moving with precision born of months of planning. The real FBI raid began 20 minutes ago, Victor announced. While we've been having this lovely conversation, federal agents have been seizing evidence that will destroy everyone in this room except me. Because unlike the rest of you, I've spent 20 years preparing for this exact scenario. The monitors showed David and Michael being led away in handcuffs from their respective offices. Caldwell Industries' corporate headquarters being evacuated as federal investigators swarmed through every floor. The Baltimore warehouse burning, not from federal action, but from carefully placed incendiary devices that would eliminate any evidence of Victor's involvement. The beautiful irony, Victor continued, is that everything will point back to the Caldwell family's operations. David and Michael's desperate attempt to destroy evidence, Ethan's break-in tonight, even Mia's apparent cooperation with a federal investigation that was compromised from the beginning. Ethan watched his entire world collapse in real time, understanding finally that there had never been any choices at all. Every decision he'd made, every principle he'd compromised, every emotion he'd felt, it had all been scripted by a man who understood that the most effective prisons were the ones people built for themselves. So what happens now? Mia asked quietly, her hand still protectively covering her belly. Now you both disappear, Victor said simply. New identities, new lives, but always under my protection. Because the alternative, federal prison for Ethan, witness protection for Mia, and foster care for a baby whose parents were both killed by the man raising her, is considerably less appealing. As Ethan looked at Mia, really looked at her, seeing the woman who'd lost everything and everyone she'd ever loved to the man now offering them salvation, he realized that Victor's final victory was forcing them to choose survival over justice. Because sometimes the only way to protect the people you love is to become the monster you've spent your life fighting against. And sometimes that transformation happens so slowly, so subtly, that you don't realize you've lost yourself until it's too late to find your way back. The underground command center had become a tomb of shattered illusions, its monitors displaying the systematic destruction of everything Ethan had ever believed in. But as he watched his brothers being led away in federal custody, something unexpected happened. Instead of despair, he felt a strange sense of clarity. "You made one mistake, Victor," Ethan said quietly, his voice cutting through the ambient hum of the surveillance equipment. "Did I?" Victor's tone was indulgent, like a teacher encouraging a struggling student. "You told me the truth." The words hung in the air with deceptive simplicity. Victor's expression shifted subtly, the first crack in his perfect composure. "For 27 years, you've controlled me through carefully managed lies," Ethan continued, stepping closer to the central conference table where displays showed the real-time destruction of his family's empire. "My father's noble struggle to legitimize our business. My brother's dedication to protecting me from harsh realities. Even my relationship with Jennifer. All of it designed to keep me compliant, grateful, and most importantly, ignorant." Mia was watching him with something approaching wonder, as if seeing him clearly for the first time. The broken woman who'd discovered her lover's murder had been replaced by someone harder, more focused. Someone who understood exactly what kind of war they were fighting. "But now I know what you really are," Ethan said. "Not some criminal mastermind playing chess with human lives. You're a man who's so terrified of losing control that you'll murder federal agents and manipulate pregnancies to maintain your grip on power. Careful, Mr. Caldwell." Victor's voice carried a warning, but something else had crept in, uncertainty. "You want to know what my biggest fear was growing up? It wasn't poverty or failure or even death." Ethan moved closer, and Victor's men shifted nervously, unsure whether their employer wanted them to intervene. "It was being powerless to protect the people I cared about. My father dying while I was studying abroad. My brothers making decisions that excluded me. Jennifer leaving without explanation." The monitors around them continued their relentless display of federal raids and burning warehouses, but the atmosphere in the room had shifted. Victor was no longer conducting an interrogation. He was being forced to defend his position. "You've spent months crafting the perfect psychological torture," Ethan continued. "Make me fall in love with someone who doesn't exist. Force me to choose between protecting my family and maintaining my principles. Then reveal that everything I've been trying to protect was never real in the first place." "And it worked perfectly," Victor replied, but his voice lacked its earlier certainty. "No, it didn't." Ethan's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Because you fundamentally misunderstood what drives me. You thought I needed to be the hero of some grand narrative, saving damsels and preserving family legacies. But that was never what I wanted." Mia stepped beside him, her hand finding his with a grip that was steady despite everything they'd endured. "What did you want?" she asked softly. "I wanted to matter. To make choices that actually meant something, even if they were the wrong choices." Ethan's voice grew stronger as he spoke, months of suppressed frustration finally finding expression. "Every decision I've made for the past 15 years has been scripted by someone else. College major chosen by my father. Career path managed by my brothers. Even my rebellion was carefully contained within acceptable parameters." Victor's face had gone very still. "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Caldwell?" "I'm proposing that for the first time in my life, I make a choice that's entirely my own. No manipulation, no hidden agendas, no protection from consequences." Ethan gestured toward the monitors, showing his family's destruction. "You've already taken everything that was built on lies. The only thing left is what's real." "And what's real?" Victor asked quietly. Ethan looked at Mia, really looked at her, seeing past the deception and manipulation to the woman who'd lost everything and was still fighting to protect her unborn child. "This is real. What I feel for her, what she feels for me. The choice to stand together even when everything else is falling apart." "How touching," Victor said, but there was something hollow in his voice. "And what exactly do you think your touching declaration of love accomplishes?" "The federal raids are real. The evidence against your family is real. In 6 hours, both of you will be wanted fugitives with no resources and no allies. Maybe, Ethan agreed. But we'll be fugitives who chose our own fate instead of accepting the one you scripted for us. Before Victor could respond, one of his men approached with urgent whispers. Victor's face went pale as he listened, then turned to stare at the central monitor with something approaching panic. "What's wrong?" Mia asked, noting the sudden shift in atmosphere. Victor was quiet for a long moment, studying the displays with the intensity of a general watching his battle plans collapse. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a note Ethan had never heard before: genuine fear. "It appears that Agent Martinez's investigation was more thorough than I realized," Victor said slowly. "The federal raids aren't just targeting the Baltimore warehouse and Caldwell Industries. They're simultaneously hitting 17 locations across 6 countries. The implications hit Ethan like cold water. Jennifer found your entire network. Impossible. She's been dead for 4 months. But her investigation wasn't," Mia said quietly, understanding dawning in her voice. "Before she died, Jennifer must have filed reports with federal prosecutors, shared evidence with international law enforcement. You killed the agent, but you couldn't kill the case she'd built." Victor's carefully constructed empire was crumbling in real time, displayed on monitors that had been meant to showcase his control. The Baltimore warehouse wasn't just burning, it was being raided by joint FBI and DEA task forces. The shipping facilities in Rotterdam, Singapore, and Panama were being simultaneously searched by international authorities. Even the legitimate business fronts were being exposed as money laundering operations through coordinated investigations that had clearly been planned for months. "She played you," Ethan realized with growing amazement. "Jennifer Martinez spent the last year of her life building a case so comprehensive that your entire organization would collapse even if you killed her." "The pregnancy timeline," Mia added, pieces clicking into place. "Jennifer wasn't trying to turn me into an informant. She was using our relationship to gather evidence while making sure I'd be pregnant when everything came down. She knew you'd try to use the baby as leverage, but she also knew that protecting her child would eventually force me to choose sides." Victor's mask slipped completely, revealing something Ethan had never expected to see: a man who'd finally encountered a problem he couldn't manipulate his way out of. "Even if that's true," Victor said desperately, "it changes nothing. You're still wanted fugitives. You still have no resources, no protection." "Actually, they do." The voice came from the command center's entrance, where a woman in tactical gear stood flanked by FBI agents. But this wasn't another of Victor's elaborate deceptions. Ethan recognized her face from family photos, from news articles, from the funeral program he'd helped design. Special Agent Sarah Martinez, Jennifer's older sister. "Hello, Victor," she said pleasantly, removing her tactical helmet. "My little sister asked me to give you a message if anything happened to her." The federal agents spread through the command center with practiced efficiency, but Sarah Martinez kept her weapon trained on Victor with the steady hands of someone who'd been waiting years for this moment. "The message is simple," Sarah continued. "The Martinez family doesn't forget, and we sure as hell don't forgive." As Victor's men surrendered their weapons, and Ethan watched the final pieces of the conspiracy collapse around them, he realized that Jennifer Martinez had orchestrated the most elaborate long-term operation any of them had imagined. Not just an investigation, but a multi-generational strategy to bring down the criminal network that had killed her father. "How long?" Mia asked Sarah, her voice filled with wonder and grief in equal measure. "Jennifer started planning this the day she became an FBI agent," Sarah replied. "Everything, the investigation, the relationship with you, even her death, was designed to force Victor into making exactly the choices he's made over the past 4 months." Ethan stared at the woman whose death had been the catalyst for everything. She knew Victor would kill her? She counted on it, because she also knew that her death would trigger federal protocols that even Victor couldn't corrupt. Protocols that would ensure her investigation continued under joint international oversight. Sarah's smile was fierce with family pride. "My sister turned herself into the perfect bait for a trap 20 years in the making." As Victor was led away in handcuffs, his perfect composure finally shattered completely. Ethan felt something he hadn't experienced in months: genuine choice. Not the illusion of choice Victor had offered, not the managed decisions his family had provided, but the terrifying freedom of making his own mistakes. "So what happens now?" he asked Sarah. "Now you and Mia decide what kind of life you want to build together," she replied simply. Jennifer's investigation has cleared you of criminal involvement. You were victims of manipulation, not willing participants. The Caldwell family assets will be frozen during the investigation, but you'll have access to enough money to start over wherever you want. Ethan looked at Mia, seeing his own amazement reflected in her eyes. They were free, not just from Victor's control, but from the weight of secrets and lies that had defined their entire adult lives. There's just one condition, Sarah added with a smile that reminded him achingly of Jennifer. My sister's baby deserves to know who her mother really was. If you're willing to help us tell that story, the Bureau can offer you something much more valuable than witness protection. What's that? Mia asked. The truth. All of it. About your families, about Jennifer's investigation, about the choices that led to this moment. Sarah's expression grew serious. It won't be easy. Truth never is. But it's the only foundation for building something real. As Ethan took Mia's hand and felt their fingers interlace with perfect certainty, he realized that Jennifer Martinez had given them something far more valuable than freedom. She'd given them the chance to choose each other with complete honesty about what that choice would cost. And for the first time in his life, Ethan was ready to pay that price willingly. The FBI command post had been established in the Caldwell Industries conference room where Ethan had attended countless board meetings. Its familiar mahogany table, now covered with evidence files, surveillance equipment, and laptops displaying the real-time collapse of Victor's international network. But as agents coordinated raids across 3 continents, Ethan found himself staring at something that made no sense. This can't be right, he said, holding up a document Sarah Martinez had pulled from Jennifer's files. The dates don't match. Sarah looked up from her coordination with international task forces, noting the confusion in his voice. What dates? My father's medical records. Ethan's hands were trembling as he studied the federal investigation timeline. According to this, Jennifer began investigating Victor's operations 18 months ago. But my father died 8 months ago from what his doctors said was a sudden cardiac episode. Mia moved to his side, her hand finding his shoulder with gentle pressure. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that a man who spent 20 years trying to legitimize his business doesn't just drop dead from stress right when a federal investigation is closing in on his partners. Ethan's voice grew stronger as pieces began falling into place. I'm thinking that Victor might not have been the only one playing a long game. Sarah Martinez's expression shifted, and she set down her radio with careful deliberation. Ethan, there's something else Jennifer discovered in her investigation. Something she was planning to tell you after Victor's network was dismantled. Before she could continue, her phone buzzed with an urgent text. Sarah's face went pale as she read it, then looked up at Ethan with something between amazement and sympathy. The federal forensics team just finished processing evidence from your father's private office, she said quietly. They found a hidden safe behind his portrait. The contents are significant. She handed Ethan a tablet displaying photographs of documents that made his world tilt sideways. FBI cooperation agreements dating back 15 years. Detailed reports on Victor's operations, written in his father's distinctive handwriting. Financial records showing systematic documentation of money laundering activities. And at the bottom of the stack, a letter addressed to my youngest son. Ethan's hands shook as Sarah handed him the actual letter, still in its sealed envelope. The paper felt impossibly heavy as he opened it, Mia reading over his shoulder as his father's voice spoke to them from beyond the grave. Asterisk, Ethan. If you're reading this, then everything I've worked for has finally come to fruition, though probably not in the way I'd hoped. By now you know the truth about our family's business, about Victor's operations, and about the web of lies I've spent your entire life maintaining. Asterisk. What you don't know is that for the past 15 years, I've been a federal informant. Asterisk, it began after your mother's death, when I realized that the fortune I'd built to give you boys security was actually built on the suffering of others. I approached the FBI through back channels, offering to provide intelligence on Victor's operations in exchange for a guarantee that my sons would be protected from prosecution. Asterisk. Asterisk, the agents I worked with became my friends, my confessors, my partners in a mission to dismantle an empire I'd helped create. Special Agent Robert Martinez became like a brother to me. When Victor had him killed, I made a promise to his daughters that I would finish what their father started. Asterisk. Asterisk, everything you've experienced over the past year. Jennifer's relationship with you, your exclusion from certain business decisions, even the timing of my death, was carefully orchestrated to put you in position to make the choice I never could. The choice between family loyalty and moral courage. Asterisk. Asterisk, I'm proud that you chose love over power, truth over comfort. That choice will save thousands of lives and prevent decades of suffering. But more importantly, it proves that you've become the man I always hoped you would be. Someone who understands that real strength comes from sacrifice, not control. Asterisk. Asterisk, the cardiac episode that killed me was induced by a medication Victor's people introduced into my blood pressure prescription. They discovered my cooperation with federal authorities 3 weeks before my death. I knew they were coming for me, but I also knew that my death would trigger protocols Jennifer and I had established to protect you and complete our mission. Asterisk. Asterisk, you are not responsible for my choices, Ethan. You are only responsible for your own. I pray that you'll use the freedom my death has purchased to build something beautiful with the woman you love. Asterisk. Asterisk, your father, who loved you enough to become the villain in your story, so you could be the hero in someone else's. Asterisk. The letter slipped from Ethan's nerveless fingers as the full scope of his father's sacrifice became clear. For 15 years, while Ethan had seen him as a man corrupted by wealth and power, his father had been systematically documenting and undermining the very criminal network that had made their fortune possible. He knew, Ethan whispered. He knew Victor would kill him, and he used his own death as the final piece of evidence. Sarah nodded, her expression heavy with respect for a man she'd never met. Your father's cooperation provided the foundation for every major breakthrough in our investigation. The shipping manifests, the financial records, the communication intercepts. None of it would have been possible without his inside access. Mia was crying openly now, understanding flooding her expression. That's why Jennifer approached me when she did. She knew Victor would eventually discover your father's cooperation and try to use you as leverage against him. The pregnancy timeline, the rescue scenario, even Victor's elaborate psychological manipulation. It was all designed to put you in position to make choices your father couldn't, Sarah continued. He was too deep in the organization to extract himself safely, but he could ensure that you had the freedom to choose differently. Through the conference room's floor-to-ceiling windows, Ethan could see federal agents leading Victor's associates out of the building in handcuffs. The empire his grandfather had built and his father had died trying to dismantle was finally crumbling. But instead of triumph, Ethan felt a profound sense of completion, as if a debt that had been accumulating for 3 generations was finally being paid. There's more, Sarah said gently, handing him another document. Your father established a trust fund specifically for Jennifer's investigation. When Victor's assets are seized and liquidated, the federal government will recover approximately $800 million in criminal proceeds. Your father's cooperation agreement specifies that those funds be used to compensate victims of organized crime operations. The numbers were staggering, but what struck Ethan more was the elegant justice of it. His father had ensured that the fortune built on suffering would be used to heal that suffering, transforming blood money into something resembling redemption. And this, Sarah added, showing him a final set of documents, is for you and Mia. The papers outlined a witness protection program unlike anything Ethan had imagined. Not hiding in fear, but starting fresh with new identities backed by legitimate careers and federal support. A chance to build the kind of life his father had always wanted for him. One based on choices rather than inheritances. Jennifer's baby will grow up knowing who her mother really was, Sarah said softly. A federal agent who sacrificed everything to protect the innocent. But she'll also grow up knowing who raised her. 2 people who chose love over power when it mattered most. As Ethan looked at Mia, seeing his own wonder reflected in her eyes, he realized that his father's greatest gift hadn't been the money or the protection or even the freedom from prosecution. It had been the opportunity to discover who he really was when everything else was stripped away. I have one question, Ethan said to Sarah. How did my father know I'd make the right choice? How could he be certain I wouldn't just accept Victor's offer and disappear into his organization? Sarah's smile was warm with understanding. Because he knew something about you that you're only beginning to understand yourself. When you rescued Mia from that flood, when you risked your life for a complete stranger, you proved that your moral compass was stronger than your self-preservation instinct. She gestured toward the window, where EMTs were helping pregnant women and elderly workers evacuate Victor's warehouse operations. People who would have been murdered to cover up the investigation if not for the choices Ethan and Mia had made. Your father knew that given the choice between saving yourself and saving others, you'd always choose others. Even when saving others meant destroying everything you'd been taught to value. As federal agents finished securing the building and the last of Victor's network was led away in custody, Ethan felt something he'd never experienced before. The weight of choices made freely, without manipulation or coercion. The consequences would be significant. The Caldwell name would forever be associated with criminal enterprise in the history books. His brothers would spend years in federal prison. The fortune that had defined his family's identity was gone. But for the first time in his life, Ethan felt rich in the only currency that mattered. The knowledge that when he'd been tested, when everything had been at stake, he'd chosen love over fear, truth over comfort, sacrifice over self-preservation. So what happens now? Mia asked, her hand covering her belly as their daughter moved restlessly inside her. Now we disappear, Ethan said simply. We become new people, build new lives, raise Jennifer's daughter to understand that heroes aren't people who never fall. They're people who choose to get back up. As they walked out of the Caldwell Industries building for the last time, leaving behind everything that had defined the first 27 years of Ethan's life, he felt something remarkable. Not loss, but possibility. Not an ending, but a beginning. Behind them, the empire built on blood and suffering was finally crumbling. Ahead of them, a future built on love and choice stretched out like an open road. And for the first time in 3 generations, a member of the Caldwell family was walking toward that future as a free man. 3 years later, Emma, sweetheart, you can't feed pancakes to the chickens. They need proper chicken feed. Ethan Lawson, the name felt natural now, like a suit tailored perfectly to fit, watched his 3-year-old daughter attempt to share her breakfast with the small flock they kept behind their farmhouse in rural Vermont. The morning sun painted everything in golden light, and for a moment he could almost forget that this peaceful scene existed because of choices that had destroyed an empire. But Daddy, they look hungry, Emma protested, her dark hair catching the light exactly like her mother Jennifer's had in the FBI photo Sarah Martinez had shown them. She had Jennifer's eyes too, intelligent, determined, already showing signs of the moral clarity that would define her character. They are hungry, Mia said, emerging from the house with a bag of actual chicken feed and the gentle smile that had become Ethan's anchor in their new life. But they need food that helps them grow strong, just like you need food that helps you grow smart. The pregnancy had transformed her in ways that went beyond the physical. The woman who'd been caught between loyalties and lies had become someone who understood exactly who she was, a mother, a partner, a survivor who'd chosen love over every safer option. The calluses on her hands now came from tending their small organic farm, rather than hiding evidence of her past. Are you Maria's daddy too? Emma asked Ethan as she carefully scattered chicken feed, her child's mind working through relationships with characteristic directness. Yes, I am, Ethan replied, watching his 6-month-old younger daughter sleep peacefully in Mia's arms. Maria was theirs completely, conceived in love after they'd started their new life, carrying none of the complicated legacy that had brought them together. And Jennifer was my first mommy? She was, Mia said gently, settling onto the porch swing they'd built together last summer. She loved you very much before you were born, and she made sure you'd be safe and happy. It was a conversation they'd had dozens of times, would have thousands more in the years to come. Emma knew she was adopted, knew she had 2 mothers who loved her in different ways, knew that families could be built through choice as well as biology. What she didn't know yet, what they'd tell her when she was old enough to understand, was that her birth mother had been a hero who'd sacrificed everything to protect innocent people. The sound of a car coming up their gravel driveway interrupted the peaceful morning. Ethan felt the old tension spike through his chest. 3 years of federal protection had taught him that unexpected visitors usually meant complications. But the woman who emerged from the SUV was familiar, welcome. Aunt Sarah, Emma shrieked, abandoning the chickens to run toward the tall figure in casual clothes who bore such a strong resemblance to her birth mother. Sarah Martinez had become a regular part of their lives, the bridge between Emma's heritage and her present. She visited every few months, bringing updates on the ongoing legal proceedings and photos of Jennifer's extended family, who were eager to be part of Emma's life when she was ready. How are my favorite fugitives from justice? Sarah asked with the dry humor that reminded Ethan achingly of her sister. Legally dead and loving it, Mia replied, shifting Maria to make room for Sarah on the swing. How did the final sentencing go? Sarah's expression grew serious. Victor got life without parole. David and Michael each got 15 years, but they'll be eligible for parole in 8 with good behavior. The judge took their cooperation with the investigation into account. Ethan nodded, feeling the complex mixture of relief and sadness that came with news about his brothers. They wrote to him sometimes, letters forwarded through federal channels that arrived months after they were sent. David had found religion in prison, spoke of redemption and second chances. Michael had become a law clerk, helping other inmates navigate appeals processes. Both had asked for forgiveness that Ethan had given freely, understanding that they'd all been trapped in a system none of them had chosen. And the compensation fund? Mia asked. Distributed its final payments last month. $800 million to 2,847 victims of organized crime operations. Your father would be proud, Ethan. His cooperation directly led to the recovery of assets that changed thousands of lives. The number still amazed him. $800 million transformed from blood money into something resembling justice. College educations for children whose parents had been killed. Medical care for victims of violence. Small business loans for communities devastated by organized crime. His father's final act had been to turn their family's greatest shame into something approaching redemption. There's something else, Sarah continued, pulling out a tablet and showing them a news article. Congress passed the Martinez Act last week. Mandatory federal cooperation protocols for family members of organized crime victims. It's named after Jennifer and your father. Their partnership is being used as a model for future investigations. Ethan studied his father's photo in the article, seeing him clearly for the first time. Not the distant businessman he'd grown up admiring or the criminal he'd briefly believed him to be, but a man who'd spent 15 years trying to balance impossible loyalties while protecting the people he loved. The hero's journey wasn't always about dramatic rescues. Sometimes it was about the quiet courage to do the right thing when no one would ever know you'd done it. Do you ever regret it? Sarah asked quietly. Giving up everything you'd known for this life? Ethan looked around their small farm. The house they'd built with their own hands, the garden Mia tended with scientific precision, the children who would grow up knowing they were wanted rather than obligated. Then he looked at Mia, seeing the woman who'd chosen to trust him with her heart despite every reason to guard it carefully. I gave up everything I'd inherited, he said finally. But I kept everything I'd earned. As if summoned by his words, Emma came running back with something clutched in her small fist. Daddy, look. A baby bird fell out of its nest. Ethan knelt beside his daughter, studying the tiny creature she held with infinite gentleness. It was barely alive, too young to survive on its own, completely dependent on others for care. Can we save it? Emma asked, her eyes holding the same hope that had driven her birth mother to risk everything for justice. We can try, Ethan said, taking the bird with hands that had once signed documents worth millions and now spent their days building chicken coops and changing diapers. But saving something takes patience and love, and sometimes accepting that you can't fix everything that's broken. But we have to try anyway. We have to try anyway. As they walked toward the house to find a makeshift nest for the injured bird, Ethan caught sight of himself in the hall mirror. Sun-weathered skin, calloused hands, eyes that held peace rather than ambition. The man who'd once asked himself who he was supposed to be had finally found the answer. He was someone who rescued things. Not for glory or recognition, but because that's what you did when you had the power to help. It had started with a pregnant woman in a flood, continued with choosing truth over comfort, and now manifested in teaching his daughters that love was an action, not just a feeling. That evening, after the girls were asleep and Sarah had returned to her hotel, Ethan and Mia sat on their porch watching stars emerge in the clear Vermont sky. The baby bird rested in a small box beside them, breathing steadily after a day of careful feeding and warmth. Do you think Emma will choose to learn about her mother's work when she's older? Mia asked, her head resting against Ethan's shoulder. I think Emma will choose whatever feels right to her when the time comes, Ethan replied. That's what Jennifer died for. The right for her daughter to make her own choices based on truth rather than manipulation. And Maria? Maria will grow up knowing that families are built through love, not biology. That courage comes in many forms. That sometimes the most important thing you can do is help someone else find their way home. A shooting star streaked across the sky, and Ethan found himself making a wish for the first time since childhood. Not for wealth or power or even safety, but for the wisdom to raise 2 daughters who would understand that real strength came from lifting others up rather than accumulating advantages for yourself. 3 years ago, he'd been a man defined by his inheritance, his family name, his position in a hierarchy he'd never questioned. Tonight, he was simply Ethan. Husband, father, farmer. Someone who understood that the most important rescues were the ones that happened quietly, daily, in the space between one person's need and another's willingness to help. The injured bird stirred in its box, and Ethan smiled. Tomorrow, if it was strong enough, they'd help it find its way back to the sky. And if it wasn't, they'd continue caring for it until it was ready. Either way, they'd face that choice together. Two people who'd learned that love wasn't about finding someone who completed you, but about choosing someone whose growth you wanted to support, even when that growth led them away from you. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human struggles and triumphs alike. But in their small farmhouse in Vermont, surrounded by sleeping children and the quiet evidence of a life built through conscious choice rather than circumstance, Ethan finally understood what his father had tried to tell him in that final letter. Real wealth wasn't what you accumulated, it was what you gave away. Real power wasn't control over others, it was the strength to sacrifice for something larger than yourself. And real family wasn't about blood or obligation, it was about choosing to love each other through whatever came next. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new choices, new opportunities to decide who they wanted to be. But tonight, Ethan knew exactly who he was. He was a man who jumped into floods to save people. And he always would be. What did this story teach you about the price of truth, the power of choice, and the courage it takes to start over when everything you believed was built on lies? Drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories that will change how you see the world.